Welcome to Smiths Interconnect 360 Connectivity Podcast. Join our experts as they explore high-end and cutting-edge topics that shape and influence the connectivity world. Enjoy this week's episode.
Welcome to Smiths Interconnect 360 Connectivity Podcast, the podcast that explores the connectivity trends and applications in today's manufacturing sector. I'm Justin Fry, Senior Product Line Manager for the medical market.
And I'm Aidan Irvin, Design Engineer for Medical as well. And we will be your hosts for today.
Thanks, Aidan. In this podcast episode, we will cover the current medical market needs and increased focus on developing connectors that are safe, reliable, and cost-effective for single-use applications, with a focus on the current market needs for disposable interconnect solutions and the disposable Hypergrip connector offered by Smiths Interconnect.
From a technology standpoint, we've seen rapid adoption of minimally invasive methods for both diagnostic and therapeutic procedures. And what that basically means is the market is moving away from open invasive surgical procedures where they can, because it reduces patient time in a hospital bed. It is a faster procedure. It's less risky for patients and doctors alike. And it also reduces the need for long-term pharmaceuticals, or it can supplement long-term pharmaceuticals. Diagnostic imaging and endoscopy, as an example, they offer real-time feedback from within the body that can aid in a much more rapid diagnosis versus other types of traditional imaging like fluoroscopy. And it can also reduce the reliance on fluoroscopy, which includes radiation exposure to the patient. So it reduces that lifetime exposure for patients as well. We're also seeing evolution rapidly in manufacturing methods, including automation. Got to correct the spelling there. Micromolding, which are creating new opportunities for disposable options at acceptable costs. One of the barriers to entry for disposables is finding that balance between cost and performance. And the recent innovations in manufacturing technologies is helping close that gap. Devices utilizing pulsed electric fields are growing rapidly, and this is really being driven by the need for non-thermal tissue ablation in multiple parts of the body, whether it's a tumorous tissue, a problematic nerve, or correcting atrial fibrillation or treating atrial fibrillation or ventricular tachycardia. Pulsed electric fields are the latest and greatest in those types of ablation therapies, as well as real-time monitoring, including wearables that are becoming more commonplace in healthcare, all of which have components that could potentially require disposable options. From a global trend standpoint, across the globe, we're seeing increased aging populations, rising incidence of cardiovascular disorders, and various forms of cancer that continue to drive strong growth for disposable interconnects that can identify and treat patients early and more safely and less invasively, as I mentioned, with the technology portion. We're also seeing the continued affluence and access to care globally. A lot of regions are catching up in terms of their access to care. And we're also seeing a continued growth in healthcare tourism, people traveling to get the care they need when they can't get it in their home country. This will continue to drive market acceptance, especially for minimally invasive procedures due to their relative low cost and higher factor of safety versus surgical procedures. The cost and risk of managing complex processes for sterilization is another driving force. There's continued scrutiny from the EPA on things like ethylene oxide sterilization, but also even something like an autoclave sterilization where you have to have complex processes for making sure you have robust record keeping that something has been reprocessed. You have to have drying cycles, re-entry into the operating room cycles, so that those processes themselves are quite expensive and hard to manage, and disposables alleviate some of that. And there's also significant funding in new therapies and diagnostics that further improve detection and reduce treatment times. I mentioned things like pulsed electric fields being used in multiple parts of the body. There's also forms of therapy being delivered external to the body, for instance, treating stroke patients and getting them cured from post-stroke ailments, and these are all things that require disposable solutions as well. From a connector standpoint specifically, what we're seeing in terms of market pressures and where the market's headed, there are increasing cost pressures that to combat alternative therapies, new market entrants, and cost per therapy expectations. With a disposable, typically the assumption is that you're trying to get the best cost possible while delivering the same level of care. And that is a challenge for manufacturers in the market. And there are innovations happening that are aiding in that. And there's also manufacturing technologies that are helping to achieve these cost pressure alleviations. We also see an increased need for hybrid connectors. And when we talk about hybrid, we typically talk about in our industry, meaning a combination of, signal and power, or high voltage with signal, or you want something like a USB running alongside fiber. So they're just consolidation of multiple connectors into a single connector while still maintaining a disposable designation. This also drives up contact density. We are seeing unique challenges in how many contacts are being requested in the same envelope or the same size connector as before. North of 100 contacts in less than a 1 inch, say square diameter or 1 inch circular diameter is not uncommon these days. And as you can imagine, accomplishing that while maintaining the cost position of a disposable can be challenging. Of course, I mentioned premium performance. Even though it's a disposable, that goes without saying. It's table stakes that you can maintain your premium performance. Signal integrity, reliability, one-hand mating for the physicians all need to be considered paramount. We also consider things like edges that might cut gloves, or how many times the physician may need to mate and demate. Even though it's a disposable device, they may need to mate and demate it a couple times throughout the procedure for various reasons. From the industry standpoint, disposable connectors are becoming more imperative to the performance of electromechanical devices in the minimally invasive segment, which, as I mentioned, are procedures where there's an alternative, faster recovery, reduced hospital stay versus open surgery procedures. Disposables are being found in catheter and endoscope handles, connecting typically a disposable handle that has a catheter or a shaft coming out that goes into the patient, and connecting that to a cable that runs to the system. And that entire handle and shaft is typically a disposable device. So examples include mapping, ablation, and imaging catheters, but also minimally invasive surgical ablation devices like tumor ablation. In patient monitoring and wearables, they're typically found anywhere therapy is being delivered external, or anytime a sensor is being used to monitor an aspect of a patient's health. For instance, flow sensors, critical organ activity monitors, wearable blood glucose monitors, and nerve and brain stimulation devices are all examples where disposables could be used. Some of the key pillars when thinking about designing for this market are the design flexibility. Disposable devices are becoming more complex. We're seeing it every year. We're seeing more disposable devices with more complex needs coming to the market. That's just increasing our needs for increased density, voltage, hybrid solutions while maintaining premium performance. And we also need to consider compatibility with high volume manufacturing processes. For instance, supporting overmolding activities versus discrete molding for the interface between the connector and the cable that it's attached to. Fit for use. All disposables will typically be assumed as skin contacting, so biocompatibility is paramount, but ergonomics are also important, including the necessity for lightweight solutions that are easy to mate and unmate, and typically requiring a passive latch, so there's no button to push to disconnect it, or ring to pull or twist. We call that a breakaway design, and the purpose for that is if there's a part of the device that is inside a patient and that the cable it's connected to gets pulled on, we don't want to force the part of the device that's in the patient to move around unexpectedly. So instead, that cable will just disconnect. It'll break away from the catheter. We also have to design for reliability and integrity. In imaging applications, image quality is king, and if you can't maintain image quality, your solution just won't be accepted. So in cardiac imaging and mapping, signal integrity is absolutely critical. And then consistent power and voltage for ablation is also critical in those devices. So the reliable connectors will reduce interruptions, but also contribute to improved outcomes for patients, which is the end goal. And then finally, customization. While we offer off-the-shelf solutions, and there's many off-the-shelf solutions in the market, there are many customers who require slight variants or even more complex variants. And the ability to be quick in customizing solutions is definitely a differentiator. So with that said, one of our latest launches is a product line extension for our Hypergrip series, which has been in the market since the early 2000s. It's a tried and true connector platform for us that we've leaned on heavily in some of the market spaces that I've mentioned today. And for us, it was a logical extension of the product line to include a disposable option. Historically, we have had these used in disposables, but even though they're technically reusable, but what we've done is we've decided to hit the market need, especially in the way of high volume manufacturing and cost effectiveness, by offering the disposable version of these connectors. Some of the things that to highlight on the Hypergrip are its well-known track record of being reliable, versatile, and having multiple keying systems standard. We have 6 available keys standard. Those keys help you make sure that you can connect the same system. You can key them differently. You can color code them differently to make sure that you're always connecting the right one. We also pass along our fingerproofing and our UL requirements to our disposable series. And we do ensure that the disposable side is sterilizable, at least for that initial sterilization, which is typically an ETO. So they are rated for an ETO sterilization as well. And as I've mentioned, as the market has seen an increased demand for lower cost premium performance options for disposables, that's driven us to extend our product line to include those. From a strategy standpoint for ourselves and for the market, we see that there's a significant number of applications that don't require the high cycle life of our traditional Hypergrip connectors. Our traditional Hypergrip connectors are in the tens of thousands of cycles for rating. We don't need near that for a disposable solution. And that the market is seeing a push toward more premium solutions needed to support high volume production prices. So those are sort of the two conflicting, let's say the conflicting measures that are a challenge to overcome are the high performance with some cost effectiveness, knowing that it's only going to be used once. Therefore, we've decided to launch a disposable solution that maintains the same look, feel, backwards compatibility as our Hypergrip, just with a few modifications to make it more cost effective, high volume process friendly. For instance, the mating cycle life is 30 mating cycles, and we don't rate it for autoclave. We rate it only for ethylene oxide. The disposable plug-in receptacle are highly flexible, minimalistic connectors that offer electrical performance and premium look and feel of our HG series. Again, just carrying all those advantages of the HG that apply to the disposables market. We kept anything that was not critical for the disposables. We're able to utilize some cost reduction activities to, again, make a version that can hit right what the disposable market needs. For our value proposition, we outline that the Hypergrip offers improved technical and value alignment because the disposables, like I mentioned, they are a lower cost version of our existing Hypergrip, and our engineer Aidan will go into some of the details as to why, some of the design considerations that help us make that a more cost-effective product. It does have a longer life cycle than many disposables on the market. So while thousands of cycles are not needed, there are a minimum number of cycles just because we know that within a single procedure, the connector may be mated and unmated more than once. So even though it's a limited number of cycles, having a reliable cycle life that meets a minimum requirement for the market is still needed. Some of our competitors have 5 or 10 mates, some as many as 20. We have a cycle of at least 30 cycle life. The breakaway design, as I mentioned, is critical. We want to make sure that any force, any pulling force that comes to that disposable results in the connector disengaging and not staying into its mating side, because we don't want to be pulling on parts or on devices that are inside the patient. We also leverage a lot of our existing Hypergrip documentation, test reports. We did redo test reports for the parts of the connector that were impacted by the changes we made to accomplish the disposable. But again, we leverage what we know about the Hypergrip's long-term success to make this a very easy to adopt solution for our customers. We are RoHS 3 compliant, and at the end of the day, we say that we think that the value that we drive is the medical look and feel, the backwards compatibility with legacy systems with our HGs, the foolproof mating accomplished by the keying and the color coding that we offer, and the smooth contours that help prevent any sort of scratching or tearing of gloves. So for target applications, when you think about areas of disposables that I've mentioned, more specifically where we think the type of density, contact density, the form factor of this connector would play in the market. We have patient monitoring, electrosurgical and endoscopic tools, catheters, home healthcare, and portable therapeutic. Across these applications, there are many sub-segments. For instance, in catheters, there's ablation catheters, there's imaging catheters, there's mapping catheters for electrophysiology. There's also catheterized procedures that are not inside the heart. So there's also intravascular catheterization. Basically across the scope of these types of devices, when you're going into the body with an energized catheter, a catheter that's carrying electricity, there's going to be a disposable component there. For electrosurgical and endoscopic tools, electrosurgical is typically very few connections, typically providing power for things like cauterizing and suturing inside the body. A lot of times you'll see these types of devices and these endoscopic tools either in handheld or in surgical robotics. And in both cases, there are disposable elements of those systems where an interconnect is required. Patient monitoring and home health care. I mentioned earlier about the wearables market and wearable therapy, and also wearable sensing that tracks some aspect of a patient's health, or helps with things like for instance, neurostimulation, helping with actual therapy. Again, there's a lot of subsegments to these. And I'm going to pass it off to Aidan Irvin, who is our design engineer.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. First, we offer the disposable in two sizes, one with 12 positions and one with 33 positions. That would be our HG2 and HG4 in our lineup. For those of you familiar with our standard offering for the receptacle, the disposable has fewer parts, so we mold in the insulator into the housing to help us create a lower cost solution. One of the things that's different from our standard is that you could select the key when you're assembling it. With this design, you are ordering specific keyways. So if you need some A keys and some C keys, those are two different part numbers for the disposable line of connectors. We still use the crimp and poke sockets in the new disposable receptacle. So the same tooling you're familiar with and the same insertion tools will still work with this new receptacle. The advantage we have of less pieces and being molded and set up for volume is just that we can support high volume requests for these connectors. And using the identical sockets from our receptacle line, we were able to maintain the expected performance that you would have from the standard receptacle in the disposable receptacle. Like I mentioned about the keyways, they're molded in, so you will be selecting a keyway upon purchase, and the panel seals are the same as the receptacle, the standard receptacle we currently sell. So the same coloring options. If you have a product that you would immediately like to switch from the standard receptacle to the disposable receptacle, the color selection and keeping that recognition for your customers would still be there. We focused on smooth contours and keeping the number of sharp edges down to help with reducing cut glove situations and trying to eliminate pinch points in the medical environment. And for the medical or the electrical performance, we have IPX4 rating on the receptacle. As a note for that, the mated condition is important when you're looking at IPX rating of this connector, but we want to state that the disposable receptacle successfully meets the X4 rating when the plug that is mated with it is potted properly and prepared properly. We meet UL94 ratings, I believe it's HB for the receptacle, and fingerproof requirements as our customers come to expect from us. Next slide, Justin. So this slide is a exploded view of what a receptacle is made of and what you could expect when ordering this. It is the molded keyed insulator, as I was explaining, that's selected when purchasing. And then our mid-range contacts that are currently offered as an option for the standard receptacle is the standard offering for the disposable receptacle. Then the panel seal, that is the same as the standard panel seal. All of the same colors apply. It is the exact part. And then the plastic panel nut, one of the things we did to target lower costs was sourcing a plastic panel nut that we could use in this application. So the cost is much lower than our metal panel nut and keeps the cost down for our customers.
That's all for this week's episode of Smiths Interconnect 360 Connectivity Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to reach out to us through the form in our podcast webpage. Stay tuned for the next episodes in which we'll explore more topics related to connectivity solutions. Thank you for listening and have a great day.